Somewhere over the Atlantic, in the middle of the night, 7 of America's most secretive aircraft climbed into the dark and turned east. And by the time the sun came up, an underground bunker beneath Tehran didn't exist anymore. That's not a movie pitch. That's confirmed. That happened. And I want to walk you through exactly what the B-2 just did, why it matters more than almost anything else that's happened in this entire conflict, and why the people running Iran's war machine are, right now, terrified of a plane that most of them will never even see coming. Stick with me, because by the end of this, you're going to understand something about American air power that almost nobody explains properly. Let's start with the moment that actually triggered this. According to Military Times, U.S. officials confirmed that B-2 stealth bombers flying out of Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri carried out a 36-hour non-stop mission to strike an underground compound where senior commanders from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had gathered. Not a warehouse, not a radar site, a meeting. A room full of the men actually running the war against the United States and its partners, and the United States found out about it, tracked it, and erased it before those commanders ever got up from the table. Now here's why that stops you in your tracks. This wasn't a random airstrike against a building somebody flagged on a map 6 weeks ago. Military Times reported that Admiral Brad Cooper, the head of U.S. Central Command, personally gave the order after intelligence indicated a nexus of senior IRGC leaders was actually meeting at that location. That's the kind of decision that gets made in real time, with a very short window and with absolutely zero room for error. You get that wrong, and you've wasted one of the most expensive, most closely guarded weapon systems on the planet on an empty basement. You get it right, and you just deleted a chunk of the enemy's command structure in one pass. So let's talk about the airplane that actually pulled this off, because I don't think people fully appreciate what they're looking at when they see a B-2 in the sky. This thing has no tail. It has no vertical fins. It's a flying wing first designed decades ago, and it still looks like it was built 20 years in the future. The whole airframe is shaped and skinned specifically to scatter radar energy instead of reflecting it back to whoever's looking for it. And that's the entire game with stealth. It's not about being invisible in the way people imagine in movies. It's about making a 200-foot wingspan aircraft look, to enemy radar, like something the size of a golf ball, or smaller, or like nothing at all. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because that's the difference between a fighter jet doing a strike and what actually happened here. A fighter has to fight its way in. It needs support. It needs escorts. It needs somebody clearing the air defense picture first. The B-2 was built to skip that whole conversation. It was built to go in completely alone, in the dark, over one of the most heavily defended pieces of airspace in the Middle East, and come out the other side without the enemy ever confirming it was there in the first place. Here's where it gets even heavier. Military Times reported that the B-2s are equipped to carry the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, a bunker buster weighing roughly 30,000 pounds, purpose-built to destroy deeply fortified underground structures. Think about the engineering problem that solves. You can build a bunker under a mountain, under a city, under 100 feet of reinforced concrete, and you can convince yourself that nothing on Earth can reach you down there. And then a weapon like the GBU-57 proves you wrong, because it isn't trying to blow the front door off. It's designed to punch straight through the earth and the concrete and detonate exactly where the people inside thought they were safest. Now let's rewind, because this April strike on that underground IRGC meeting wasn't the B-2's first appearance in this war, and understanding the timeline is what actually makes this moment hit different. Go back to June of last year. CBS News reported on what the Pentagon called Operation Midnight Hammer, when 7 B-2 Spirit bombers flew a mission covering more than 7,000 miles round trip to strike Iran's nuclear sites at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, told reporters that more than 125 U.S. aircraft participated in that single mission, including the bombers themselves, fighter escorts, refueling tankers, a guided missile submarine, and a full package of surveillance aircraft. Let that sink in for a second, because that number matters. 125 aircraft, all coordinated, all timed, all in support of getting 7 B-2s to one target set and back out again undetected. That's not a strike. That's a symphony. And according to CBS News, Kane said initial battle damage assessments indicated that all 3 sites sustained extremely severe damage, every one of them, in one night. So when you understand that Operation Midnight Hammer already happened, already proved the B-2 could reach into the heart of Iran's nuclear program and walk away clean, you start to understand why this most recent strike on the IRGC leadership meeting is such a different kind of message. The first time, the United States was targeting infrastructure, buildings, centrifuges, concrete. This time, according to Military Times, it was targeting people. Specific, identified, high-value people, sitting in a room believing they were untouchable. Let's talk about the flight itself for a second, because the logistics here are honestly the part that blows my mind the most. Air and Space Forces magazine has previously detailed how these missions are flown directly out of Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, a base in the middle of the American heartland, thousands of miles from Iranian airspace. The bombers take off from Missouri, refuel multiple times in the air along the way, cross the Atlantic, cross the Mediterranean, and arrive over the target without ever needing to land on foreign soil. That's the entire point of the B-2's design philosophy. The United States doesn't need a forward base sitting inside missile range of Tehran to strike inside Iran. It can fly the mission from the middle of Missouri and be home in time to debrief. And I want you to think about what that means strategically, because it's bigger than just one airplane being impressive. It means there is no safe distance anymore. There's no bunker deep enough, no meeting private enough, no location remote enough to guarantee protection from a strike planned and executed from literally the other side of the planet. If you're a commander inside the IRGC right now, the psychological weight of that has to be enormous. You cannot outhide this weapon. You can only hope you're not the target that night. Now let's get into the sourcing on all of this, because I think it matters that you know where this information is actually coming from, not just take my word for it. The April strike on the underground IRGC compound was reported by Military Times, citing a U.S. official who described the 36-hour mission directly. Army Recognition, a defense industry outlet that tracks military hardware and operations globally, separately reported that the target was described as an underground Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps command bunker in Tehran, struck with GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrators as part of a broader campaign the Pentagon has referred to as Operation Epic Fury. The Wall Street Journal's reporting on the same event, referenced by Army Recognition, connected that strike to a broader operation that also involved the recovery of a downed American airman inside Iran during the same window of time. That's not a small detail. That means this wasn't an isolated bombing run. That was a full multi-domain operation, hitting a leadership target and pulling out a downed American on the same timeline in the same hostile airspace. So when the title of this says the B-2 just did something huge, I don't want you to think that's just a hook to get you to click. I want you to actually understand the scale of what got confirmed. You had a stealth bomber campaign that had already, months earlier, destroyed Iran's 3 most protected nuclear sites in a single overnight mission. And then, months later, that same aircraft came back and took out a room full of the people actually directing the war, while simultaneously supporting a personnel recovery operation in the same hostile airspace. That's not one story, that's a pattern. And patterns are what tell you where a war is actually headed. Let's talk a little more about Operation Epic Fury as a whole, because it's the umbrella that a lot of these individual strikes fall under. Army Recognition has reported that, as part of Epic Fury, B-2 bombers were also used earlier this year to strike Iran's hardened ballistic missile facilities, using 2,000-pound class weapons like the Mark 84 and the GBU-31, hitting more than 1,000 targets in the opening 24 hours of that phase of the campaign alone. Hess Central Command confirmed those strikes publicly, stating that the mission was designed to deliver long-range fire to not only eliminate the threat from the Iranian regime that day, but to eliminate their ability to rebuild in the future. That's their language, not mine. Eliminate the ability to rebuild. That tells you the objective was never just about the moment. It was about making sure whatever gets hit doesn't come back in 6 months with a fresh coat of paint on it. Now stay with me, because I want you to understand how big Epic Fury actually is, since a lot of people only ever see one clip at a time and never get the full scale in one place. According to research from the Institute for Counterterrorism, the United States and Israel launched this coordinated campaign on February 28th, with the United States calling its side of the operation Epic Fury and Israel calling its side Roaring Lion. The stated objective, according to Israeli officials cited in that research, was to eliminate existential threats posed by Iran, with a direct focus on missile and drone capabilities alongside nuclear-related infrastructure. The first wave of strikes on that opening day targeted Tehran directly, hitting central government sites before expanding outward to additional cities across the country. Here's a detail that I think gets lost in a lot of the day-to-day coverage. Research published by the Center for Strategic and International Studies noted that President Trump announced the opening of this campaign through an 8-minute video posted to social media at 2 a.m. Eastern Time, with no formal address to the media and no full briefing to Congress beyond a notification to a small handful of congressional leaders. That video reportedly closed with a direct message to the Iranian people, telling them the hour of their freedom was at hand. Whatever you think about the messaging choice, it tells you this campaign was built from day one to be treated as something bigger than a routine strike package. It was framed publicly as an attempt to end the conflict at its source. The scale of the opening days alone is honestly staggering when you put numbers to it. Reporting compiled by Israel Daily News noted that Israel says it has dropped more than 1,200 bombs on Iranian targets, while the United States reported striking around 1,000 separate sites as part of the same joint operation. A separate update from the Institute for Counterterrorism, tracking the campaign about a week in, reported that Israeli forces alone had neutralized approximately 300 Iranian missile launchers and had dropped around 4,000 munitions across Iran in continuous waves of strikes targeting the regime's missile and military infrastructure. By late March, an update from the Jewish Institute for National Security of America reported that U.S. Central Command announced its forces had bombed more than 9,000 Iranian regime targets throughout the operation, including more than 140 naval vessels, missile locations, and intelligence facilities tied directly to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. I also want to mention something that's central to understanding why the leadership strikes matter so much right now. Multiple outlets, including tracking of the conflict compiled from open source reporting and separate analysis referenced by the Institute for Counterterrorism, describe how the opening days of this campaign reportedly resulted in the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, along with several senior Iranian officials, creating a temporary leadership vacuum that was eventually filled by the appointment of his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, as the new supreme leader. When you understand that the very top of Iran's leadership structure was already struck once at the start of this campaign, it puts the later strike on that underground IRGC command meeting into even sharper focus. This isn't a war that's been quietly avoiding leadership targets. It's a war that opened by reaching the single most protected man in the entire country, and has continued working its way through the command structure underneath him ever since. None of this has come without cost on the American and Allied side either, and I don't want to gloss over that because it matters. Reporting compiled by the Jewish Institute for National Security of America documented that a U.S. service member, Sergeant Benjamin Pennington, was killed in an Iranian attack targeting American troops at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia in early March. That same reporting documented 6 additional U.S. service members killed when a refueling aircraft went down over western Iraq less than a week later. This is a real war with real losses on both sides, and every strike we're talking about today happened inside that larger, costly context, not in some abstract, bloodless simulation. So keep that scale in your head as we go forward, because it's the backdrop that makes the B-2's role so important. Thousands of munitions, thousands of targets, multiple branches, multiple nations, coordinated together. And inside all of that noise, the B-2 keeps getting called back for one specific job that nothing else in the American arsenal can do quite the same way, which is reaching the targets that are buried too deep, guarded too well, or hidden too carefully for anything else to touch. And this is where I want to slow down and actually explain how a mission like this gets built. Because I think a lot of people picture a strike like this as just one plane flying to one target and dropping one bomb, and that's not even close to reality. When a B-2 goes after a target like an underground command bunker in a heavily defended city, that mission gets planned around layers. First, you need the intelligence. Somebody has to know, with a very high level of confidence, that a specific location holds a specific high-value target at a specific window in time. That intelligence has to be fresh, because leadership meetings don't sit still and wait for you. Then you need the platform, which in this case is the B-2, because you need something that can get into that airspace without alerting the target that anything is coming. And then you need the weapon, which in this case is a bunker buster, heavy enough and precise enough to actually reach a target buried under layers of earth and reinforced concrete, rather than just cratering the surface above it and leaving everyone underground shaken, but alive. All 3 of those pieces have to line up at the exact same moment, or the whole mission fails. And that's really the story here. It's not just that America has a stealth bomber. Plenty of countries dream about stealth bombers. It's that the United States has built an entire intelligence and logistics chain capable of putting that bomber over the right building on the right night, with the right weapon, hitting the right room. That is an extraordinarily difficult thing to pull off even once. The fact that it's happened multiple times now, across multiple operations, tells you this isn't luck. This is a repeatable capability. Now let's talk about what this actually does to Iran's decision-making, because that's the part that matters beyond the footage and the headlines. When the United States can reach an underground meeting of IRGC commanders inside Tehran itself, that changes how every single leader in that structure has to behave. You can't hold long meetings in the same location twice. You can't trust that any bunker, no matter how deep, is actually safe. You have to assume that your communications are being watched, your patterns are being tracked, and your most protected physical locations are still inside the reach of a plane that took off from Missouri 2 days ago. That kind of pressure doesn't just cost lives when the bomb lands, it costs functionality every single day in between. Because leadership that's constantly worried about being targeted makes worse decisions, moves slower, and trusts fewer people. I also want to bring in one more piece of reporting here because I think it adds important context to how seriously Washington is treating this campaign. Air and Space Forces magazine reported that the Pentagon's cost estimate for the broader Iran conflict has climbed to $37.5 billion, according to testimony from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to a congressional committee. That's not a number you spend lightly, and it's not a number that gets approved unless the people making these calls believe the strategic payoff is worth it. When you're willing to spend that kind of money and put assets like the B-2 repeatedly into harm's way, that tells you the target set isn't seen as optional. It's seen as central to how this entire conflict gets resolved. Let's shift gears for a second and talk about the defensive side of this, because I think it's important to understand exactly why Iran, even with real air defense systems on paper, has struggled to do anything about the B-2 specifically. Defense analysis from outlets like 1945 has pointed out that Iran relies on systems like the S-300 and the domestically produced Bavar 373 for its integrated air defense network. Those are real systems, capable against a lot of aircraft. But the B-2's flying wing shape and radar-absorbent skin dramatically shrink the range at which those systems can even build a reliable track on it in the first place. And even if a radar operator gets a flicker of a return, that's very different from getting a clean, confident lock good enough to commit a missile to. Wait too long trying to confirm what you're seeing, and the aircraft that triggered the alert has already released its weapons and turned for home. And that's before you even factor in that the United States almost never sends the B-2 in completely alone. Analysis of how these strike packages are built has described a layered approach, where electronic warfare aircraft jam enemy radars, decoy systems create false tracks on enemy screens, and standoff weapons take out air defense nodes before the bomber ever gets close enough to matter. So even in the rare moment where an Iranian radar operator thinks they might have something, they're often already dealing with a jammed, cluttered, deceptive picture that makes acting on that contact incredibly risky. Now, I want to bring this back to something a lot of people miss when they watch footage like this online. This isn't just a story about a bomb going off. This is a story about what it actually costs to build and operate a weapon system like the B-2 at this level of precision, night after night, mission after mission. Every single sortie requires an enormous support structure behind it. Maintenance crews keeping an incredibly complex, low observable aircraft in flyable condition. Intelligence teams tracking targets in real time, sometimes down to individual meetings inside a single building. Tanker crews flying alongside for hours just to keep the bombers fueled across an ocean. Planners building routes that avoid detection the entire way in and the entire way out. When you see one clip of an explosion, you're looking at the very last 2 seconds of a process that took, in some cases, weeks or months to actually build. Let's also talk honestly about the human side of this, because I never want to gloss over that. Every mission like this involves real aircrew putting themselves inside extremely hostile airspace, flying for over 30 hours at a time in some cases, with almost no margin for error. Military Times' own past reporting on earlier B-2 missions in this campaign described crews recounting the explosion from their bunker buster strikes as the brightest they had ever seen, a detail that tells you just how close, both physically and emotionally, these crews are to the reality of what they're doing, even from the cockpit of an aircraft flying miles above the target. So where does this leave things right now? The pattern over the last year has been consistent and honestly pretty stark when you lay it out in order. First, Operation Midnight Hammer wiping out Iran's 3 primary nuclear enrichment sites in a single overnight mission using GBU-57 bunker busters. Then, as part of the broader Operation Epic Fury, repeated B-2 strikes against hardened ballistic missile facilities using 2,000-pound class penetrator weapons, hitting more than 1,000 targets in the opening day alone, according to Army recognition. And now most recently, a 36-hour mission specifically targeting an underground meeting of senior IRGC commanders in Tehran, confirmed by Military Times, tied by additional reporting to a simultaneous operation to recover a downed American airman inside the country. Every escalation in that sequence moves from infrastructure to military capability to leadership itself. That's not a random pattern. That's a deliberate widening of the target set over time. And that's really what makes this most recent strike the biggest one yet, even though it wasn't the biggest in terms of the number of bombs dropped or the number of aircraft involved. It's the biggest because of what kind of target it was. You can rebuild a missile site. You can dig a new bunker. What you can't easily replace is an experienced commander who's spent years building relationships, chains of command, and operational knowledge inside a system as opaque and compartmentalized as the IRGC. When strikes start reaching that layer of leadership and reaching it accurately, that's when a conflict stops being about equipment and starts being about whether the people actually running the war on the other side can function at all. I think it's also worth pausing on the American side of the ledger here, specifically the base this all flies out of. Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri isn't just a runway. It's the only home of the B-2 fleet in the entire world. Every single one of these historic headline-making missions, the Fordo strike, the Natanz and Isfahan strikes, the ballistic missile facility strikes, and now this underground IRGC command bunker strike, all of them trace back to the same relatively small stretch of American farmland in Missouri. Local reporting out of Kansas City has even noted that Congress has been investing directly in that base's future, a sign that lawmakers understand exactly how central Whiteman has become to this entire operation and how much weight it's currently carrying. Now, let's talk a little bit about what comes next, because I don't want to leave you just looking backward at what's already happened. If this pattern holds, and every piece of reporting so far suggests it's holding, the target set is likely to keep moving toward exactly the kind of thing we just saw. Leadership, command structure. The people who actually make decisions, rather than just the equipment those decisions get carried out with. Because at a certain point you can replace missiles faster than you can replace commanders you trust enough to hand real authority to. And if the United States keeps proving it can reach those people, wherever they think they're hiding, inside Tehran or anywhere else, that fundamentally changes the calculation for anyone left in that structure, deciding whether staying loyal is even worth the risk anymore. I also want to be really clear about something before we wrap this up, because I think it matters. None of what I've described here is speculation dressed up as fact. Every specific detail in this video, the 36-hour mission length, the identity of Whiteman Air Force Base as the launch point, the involvement of Admiral Brad Cooper in ordering the strike, the connection to Operation Epic Fury, the earlier Operation Midnight Hammer strikes on Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, the battle damage assessment described by General Dan Kane, all of it is drawn directly from reporting by outlets including Military Times, CBS News, Army Recognition, and Air and Space Forces magazine. I wanted to lay all of that out clearly, so you're not just taking my word for any of this. You can go verify every piece of it yourself. And honestly, that's the part that I think gets lost in a lot of coverage of moments like this. It's easy to see a clip of an explosion and feel something about it, whether that's relief, concern, or just raw shock at the scale of the technology involved. But the story that actually matters is the one underneath the footage. It's the story of an aircraft designed decades ago that still, today, represents the single hardest problem an adversary's air defense network can be asked to solve. It's the story of an intelligence apparatus precise enough to track a room full of specific human beings inside one of the most secretive military organizations on Earth. And it's the story of a base in the middle of Missouri that keeps sending that capability 7,000 miles across the world and bringing it home again. So when people ask what the B-2 actually did that was so significant, the honest answer isn't just that a bomb went off in Tehran. It's that the United States proved, for what is now not the first time, that distance, depth, and secrecy are no longer reliable forms of protection for anyone this campaign decides to target. Whether that's a nuclear enrichment site sitting under a mountain, a hardened missile facility buried beneath the desert, or a private meeting of senior commanders sitting in an underground room in Tehran, the pattern is the same. If it can be found, it can be reached. And if it can be reached, according to everything we've seen documented across this entire campaign, it eventually gets hit. Before we wrap up, I want to address one more thing that always comes up in the comments whenever I cover strikes like this, which is the question of whether any of this actually ends the conflict, or just extends it. And I think the honest answer, based on everything we've laid out today, is that it doesn't look like either side is treating this as close to over. Every escalation in this campaign, from the opening strike on Tehran back in late February, through the destruction of the nuclear sites at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, through the thousands of targets hit under Epic Fury, and now through this direct strike on a room full of IRGC commanders, has followed the same trajectory. Each phase has gone deeper into the structure that keeps this regime functioning, not wider into random symbolic targets. That's usually a sign that a military campaign is being run with a very specific end state in mind, even if that end state hasn't been fully declared out loud yet. And that's really the tension sitting underneath this entire story. On one hand, you have a weapon system, the B-2, that keeps proving it can reach anywhere, at any depth, without warning. On the other hand, you have an adversary that keeps adapting, keeps hiding, and keeps insisting publicly that its best capabilities haven't even been used yet. Something in that equation eventually gives. Either the leadership structure inside Iran runs out of places to hide its decision makers, or the war grinds on long enough that both sides are simply absorbing losses without anyone achieving the kind of decisive moment that actually forces a resolution. Based on what we've covered today, and based on how consistently the B-2 has been called back to hit exactly the targets that matter most, I'd bet on the first outcome long before the second one. I want to know what you think happens next in this pattern. Do you think the target set keeps climbing higher up the chain of command, or do you think this most recent strike represents close to the ceiling of what gets publicly confirmed? Drop your thoughts down in the comments because I genuinely want to see where people land on this, and I read every single one of them. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, the biggest thing you can do to help more people find accurate reporting instead of guesswork is to share it with someone who'd actually want to understand what's happening here instead of just scrolling past another headline. Thanks so much for watching all the way through, and if you want to keep following exactly how this story develops night by night, I'll keep laying it out for you here, piece by piece, sourced and verified the same way I did today. I'll see you in the next one.